Okay, we're recording.
All right.
So, Aneesh, why don't you catch us up from where we left off last time?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So this is Republic Book 2. So we were picking up where Adiamatus and Glaucon finished their argument, and the question that they posed to Socrates was, if you were to compare perfect injustice to perfect justice, tell us why one would choose perfect justice. Perfect injustice being someone who knows he's unjust, but he's just so devious that society believes him to be perfectly just. And even when he's caught and he's found to be unjust, he can easily weasel out of it. And he has a life that's full of all the accrued amounts that come with perfect injustice. That person's life versus someone who's perfectly just, so just in fact that he does not care about what society has to say, doesn't care about the consequences of perfect justice. He is in fact thought of by society to be somebody who's unjust and then suffers terribly because of the injustice, because society believes that he's unjust. And Socrates now has to defend why one would still choose perfect justice over perfect injustice. And that is the start of this really long, in a way, an allegory that Socrates develops to explain to the reader, or Plato develops to explain to the reader the meaning of perfect justice and why that is superior to perfect injustice.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the complexity of the question being asked, which is make the case that it is better to be just even if you reap no rewards from it, and in fact maybe even incur some suffering because of your pure justice. Make the case that that is the better life than the person who is unjust privately but appears to be just publicly and gets the accolades, undeserved accolades. So, and I think it speaks to the complexity of the question, because when it ensues is really the main dialogue, which you can then you see as the rationale behind the title of the book as Republic. Because what they're going to do now is essentially they have to now construct. They actually have to construct the ideal city, the just city, and there's a specific reason Socrates takes this approach. Because, he starts off by saying, wow, so you guys are giving me a very tall order. Justice is not a concept, even for him, that's easy to describe or talk about or to explain. And so he makes the case that, well, maybe we can take an alternative approach. So instead of trying to really understand the essence of justice at the individual level, since it's such a complex topic, maybe what we can do is magnify it. We can blow it up. So he asks his interlocutors, would you not agree that justice isn't just a feature of the individual, but can be a feature of a state or a city or of a larger population? And they agree. And so then he also says, well, just like it's easier to read writing that is in big, bold letters, sort of like a children's book, before you get down to writing that's in smaller letters, could we not just build a just city, and within the interactions within that city, we can see where the issues of justice arise, and then we can sort of start to lay down the criteria for what is justice in this particular city, and then maybe we can translate that down to the individual level and then understand justice at the individual level. It's actually a very genius stroke when you think about it.
Yeah, and it's we have to realize that now when we talk about like justice, if you ask somebody what is justice, everybody has their own definitions of what justice is. But all of those definitions are actually derived from this conversation. Everything is a footnote to Plato. Plato was the first one to sit and think about, well, maybe it was Socrates who was sat and thought about what is justice. And he didn't have any precursors to go by. Right. He didn't have a Webster's dictionary that he could open up and say, oh, justice, okay, this is what it means. So just imagine a conversation now, and not only a conversation about defining justice for the next 2,000 years till today. This is the definition of justice that is accepted. Creating it in a dialogue, in his mind. And not only that, coming up with a concept which I never thought of, and most people I don't think of it this way. Being just requires an other person to be present. But that is the concept everybody thinks of. How can I be just unto someone else? But there is in fact a justice that doesn't require another person to be there. It is justice unto oneself. And the question that is being asked by Diamandis and Glaucon is not about justice unto another individual. It is justice unto oneself. They're saying perfectly unjust human. That means a perfectly unjust human being is unjust to himself, but seems just to everybody else. Versus a perfectly just human who's perfectly just to himself, but seems unjust to everybody else, right?
Yeah.
That internal sense of justice and injustice toward oneself. Defend that, Socrates. So Socrates says, fine, before we even start talking about such a complicated topic as justice unto our own self, let us talk about a more simpler topic, that is justice unto someone else. And even that topic, man, is such a difficult topic to talk about that he has to create. He starts not, he doesn't say, let's look at the society around us, friends, and see how justice works. He says, in order for us to do this, we have the tall order now to create the perfect state, the perfect city. Let's look at what it takes to create a perfect city. And based on that, then we can look at the interactions of the people, like you said, between that city, and then come to know what justice is unto someone else. And then once we have that definition down, then we can take that and apply it into ourselves and create the perfect man, or perfect human, I should say, and find where justice plays a role in that, and then figure out if true injustice is better than true justice. That is what's happening here.
Yeah, I mean, it's the reason I say it's a genius stroke is precisely for that reason, because if you were to sit in a room with people and from scratch, to the extent you can, abandon your biases and abandon your preconceived notions about things, and if you were going to build a society from scratch, that exercise will lead you, if it's done thoroughly, which is clearly it's done here. I mean, we have plenty to cover. If it's done thoroughly, there's a realization at some point that the justice that exists at the individual level is a reflection of the justice that exists at the macro level, right? At the level of the state, and vice
micro
versa.
and macro.
There's the micro and macro again, micro justice and macro justice. But Socrates, this is the path he's leading the reader down. He understands that justice is an emergent property. It comes from the interplay of the individual and the individual's interactions with others. And in a contradictory sense, they exist and fulfill themselves and one another, which is why it can exist in an individual and actually serve the individual. It can actually replenish the individual, but also be a source of strength at the state, city, or at the macro level as well. So that's a very difficult concept to explain to somebody, that the justice of a state really relies on the justice of individuals that compose it. And then at the same time, it's just as true to say that the justice of the individual relies on the justice of the state. So there's this concurrent dynamic here.
That's a great point.
And so how do you explain that to somebody? Right. Because up until
how do you create it?
Right. And up until this point, what we've had is essentially we've had straw men like Thrasymachus and to some extent Glaucon's pseudo argument for injustice. And what Plato is doing is allowing Socrates to take those down, because what's happening in this dialogue is Plato is tearing down your idea of justice. And he's saying, maybe we should look at this.
Right.
And Socrates begins now to build the organism of justice using this analogy.
Because you will not get anywhere if you were to try to argue with someone who has the preconceived notions that you're talking about, who has the biases that you're talking about, and then try to explain to them what perfect justice is. They'll be like, man, that doesn't happen in the world today. It's not going to happen. So Socrates says, in order to further this argument, let us create a state where there are no preconceived notions that exist today, no biases that exist today. And so this may seem, as we read it, to someone as, like a dystopian society. Because the steady state that Socrates is going to create now is nothing like the life that we see today in the United States, in most democratic nations of the world. That's not how life is. So,
or I would say any nation. Yeah,
maybe. Yeah, I mean, this is obviously, but
right.
there is like a lot of the things he talks about. Some of these things do happen in certain states where there's, talking about censorship and control. That kind of control does exist, but obviously not from a standpoint of justice. I digress. What I'm trying to say essentially is that we have to guard ourselves against trying to make comparisons of the current world that we live in today and the city-state that Socrates is trying to create. Because he's not creating a city-state and saying that that is how we should be living. He says in order to understand what justice is, this is the basic premise that we need to follow. He's creating a backdrop for his argument. He's not saying that this is what I expect, this is how we should live. So it's just important to kind of keep that in mind.
Right.
And the other thing that I would like to say is that what we are trying to do here is not talk about how to create a city-state. It is how to order ourselves internally and look and find how we can be just. And actually, before that, figure out what perfect justice and perfect injustice is inside our own minds, and then decide for ourselves if, in fact, are we swayed by the argument made by Socrates that perfect justice is better than perfect injustice. That is all this experiment is. It's a thought experiment. So we're going to embark on this thought experiment without much further ado, because he starts with the basic premise of this city. How does a city come to be? He says, in order for a city to exist, it is because no one is individually self-sufficient, but each has many needs he cannot satisfy. That's his basic premise for a city-state. Now, this is where I had my first pause. I was like, what does he mean that humans are individually not self-sufficient, and that we have needs that we cannot satisfy? That is against the law of nature. In nature, every organism is self-sufficient. It has within its power the ability to acquire what it needs for it to flourish. Then how come Socrates is saying that humans don't follow that natural law where I need another human being because I cannot self-satisfy? And I think the reason why that's the case is because they believed in Athens that civilized life was a post-agrarian society where you had land ownership and someone was tilling the land, and there was commerce, and there was big city-states, large populations. And they believed that anybody who didn't live like that lead a cultured life. They were barbarians. So all the hunter-gathering communities that existed in the world at that point, someone could argue, in those societies which were relatively successful and have been successful for many millennia prior to agrarian societies, were also successful societies. And in those societies, people were inherently self-sufficient. Yes, you did need other human beings to band together for security and stuff, but a human had the capability to do all the things he or she needed to survive. You see?
Yeah.
So what do you think about that? Did you get that kind of feeling when you looked at this?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I read that, I sort of took it as what he's doing is he's beginning to lay the foundational web of accountability that exists between peoples in a society or in a group. And I think it becomes more specialized in a post-agrarian society where you have tradesmen, craft workers, and that sort of thing, and they actually go into the more details about that. Mm-hmm. But what I think he was simply doing was, when he made that phrase, he was saying that people have needs that cannot be met by themselves, which is to say that either through chance or through evolution or through whatever mechanism, people find themselves at a point where they have needs for things that they cannot provide for themselves because of the fact that their needs have expanded in one case, or that the resources available to them have expanded and they can evolve into needs. So I see your point that at a kind of a what's the word that I'm looking for? It's the diet.
What's the paleo diet.
Paleo. Okay, yeah. So the paleo human.
Paleo.
Right. I forgot the I forgot the era, but I remembered the diet. But the paleo era, right? That's the whole idea that the paleo human survives on their own, right? They don't. In fact, what's the key feature of that diet? There's no grains. There's nothing that was grown from the earth. Nothing that a farmer would provide in that diet. It's all you only eat.
Hunter-gatherer.
You only eat what a hunter-gatherer would have procured, and so that's the rationale behind the diet, because presumably that's what we were. Well, so now you have a society where there's grains everywhere, there's carbs everywhere, there's markets everywhere. It's the complexity that comes out of this simple idea of like, no, we're not going to chase the herd anymore. We're going to stop and just start planting the plants that we need.
Right.
The changes that result from it. One of the changes is this need for specialization, because if you spend all of your time growing, then who's going to make your shoes or your clothing? And to some extent that happens in early agrarian society, but eventually it gets to a certain point where people specialize because they lose the skill sets.
Yeah. So
and the needs themselves expand.
Correct. But the needs, though, when you talk about human need, there is a difference between a hunter-gatherer's need and the farmer's need.
I agree.
So when we this is very common. What are the basic human needs? Everybody says it's food, clothing, and shelter.
Right, the Maslow. Right.
Yeah. So where does that come from? It comes from the Republic. I don't think there's a text before this that actually lays it down so neatly. It says,
I think you're right.
Yeah, it says right here.
The hierarchy of needs.
The hierarchy of needs. Now, the first and greatest of our needs is to provide food in order to sustain an existence in life. The second is for shelter, and the third is for clothes.
Right.
It's right here, food, clothing, and shelter, man.
Right.
And everything is a footnote to Plato. Anyway, point is, this though, when he's talking about food, clothing, and shelter, the building of shelter, and the sewing of clothes and the growing of the grain are three trades that if one is a farmer, yes, the farmer can also spend time building a house, and the farmer can also spend time trying to, figure out how to stitch clothes together. But then he's wasting time not growing the grain. So if he grows the grain, he spends all his time doing that, and he's very good at it. He's a specialist at that, right? He produces enough where he can keep some for himself and use the rest to now allow for someone else to stitch his clothes for him and someone else to build his house for him.
Sure.
And those people then come together to form the primordial city. The primordial city is a farmer, is a someone who can make clothes, and someone who can build a home. Right. As a matter of fact, if society as we know it collapses, these are the kind of things that we would need. And obviously, unless of course you believe that we'll go to a hunter-gatherer. If you go to a hunter-gatherer mode, right, you don't need either of these three things.
Right.
As a matter of fact, humans can survive without these three things. But if you go to the basic primordial city state, these are the three most important people in our community today. The guys who can build us our house, the guys who can build us, get us our clothes, and the person who grows our food. Of all the three, the most important one is the farmer.
Yeah.
And is that the case in society today, that the farmer is the most important person?
Yeah, I mean, that's right. We moved. So and I think it also speaks to the fact that, again, as a critical mass of population, the volume and the variety of needs is going to change significantly. So again, that's the other force that drives the specialization that's required. But anyway, so fundamentally, when I read that, I thought, well, he's basically laying this the foundation of this web of accountability of needs. So you give me clothing, I give you food, and that's how it all starts, right? As a matter of convenience, and as a matter of being more effective with time as a resource.
And the other thing then he adds, okay, so that is just saying that's the primordial city.
Right.
But the farmer needs tools. The person who builds the house needs tools. The guy who makes the clothes needs tools. So each of those tools require their own subspecialties. And so those people also will have to be part of the society now. So now your city is growing just a little bit. From three, now it's gone to other people who are supporting these three, right? That still goes to show that the most important needs are food, clothing, and shelter. And then there are other things that support those needs, right? And so now as the city grows, right, you will find that in your city, he says that in your city there may not be in all the raw materials that you need to for the food, clothing, and shelter.
Right.
Because you're geographically locked in a certain place. Now you need to find those things in some other place. And now there's a little primordial city there as well. And those people don't have the things that you need.
Here we
so
go.
now you'll have to find somebody who's going from one city to the other city, trying to procure these things and bringing it back to your city. So you need some sort of trade to exist between these two cities. Now, and so that is another feature of a city now, that we need trade. Now, if you need trade, then you need some sort of currency, because if I was a farmer and I had some bushels of wheat, right, and I went to market to sell my bushels of wheat, first of all, I need a marketplace to do that. But I go to the marketplace and no one shows up to buy my wheat. I'm just spending all day there sitting, no one buys my wheat, and I have to take it back, and I haven't done farming for that day. Instead of that, I could go to the market, find a guy who buys the wheat from me, and so I need a currency. He pays for the wheat, and I go back to my farming. That guy sits around in the marketplace and waits for someone to come by and buy the wheat from him. So you need that. What is it called?
You need like traders. You need market workers.
Traders and what's the name for that, man? Retailers.
Yeah,
retailers. Basically,
right.
they don't. So that now, if you think about a retailer is somebody who doesn't have the skills to produce anything important, right? And because you need two important things to trade, you need two needs to trade between the two. He has neither skills, but he still ends up making a profit by sitting right in the middle, because he's able to play the money game. Even in your simple city, in the simple primal city,
just the layers upon layers upon layers.
There's layers upon layers already, right? If you look around you, Amazon is like a retailer.
Yeah.
Right? And it doesn't produce anything. It connects two needs and ends up being the richest, corporation in the world. But even a simple city, though, you cannot escape it. You cannot escape retail.
Yeah, I mean, so what's happening here, though, is in this dialogue, you're almost seeing like the embryology of modern society.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It's all the little folds and channels
like
and ducts in the circulatory system, all gradually becoming more and more complex, and interdependence and connectedness, all basically increased by orders of magnitude with small changes
already.
here and there.
And it's going to get a whole lot worse here soon.
Right.
But this just because we decided to own a piece of land and till it, right? We went from having a simple existence of a hunter-gatherer where each of us was self-sufficient to now having a concept where there's a retailer. That guy cannot do anything. He cannot meet. He's absolutely self-insufficient, as a matter of fact. The only way he survives is if you have a skill and someone else has a skill, he lives off of that skill. Within a few generations, you've created a whole set of human beings who cannot survive on their own. And if you look at life today, I don't grow anything that I eat. I don't make anything that I wear. I don't build anything that I live in. I'm completely dependent upon someone.
And how is it that you cannot define justice with all of this interdependence? It's actually a legitimate question. It's fascinating.
Man, it is fascinating.
So pretty shortly after this point, Socrates reaches his first point of pause. He says, okay, we have a rudimentary society here. So where's justice here?
Hold on. Does he do that before he talks about how they will live and pass their time? Because he talks about what these people will do, right? He talks about how they will live.
Well, go ahead.
They will make food, wine, clothes, and shoes, won't they? They will build themselves houses. In the summertime, they will mostly work naked and barefoot, but in the winter they will buy adequate clothing and shoes. For nourishment, they will provide themselves with barley, meal, and wheat flour, which they will knead and bake into noble cakes and loaves, and serve up on a reed or on clean leaves. They will recline on couches strewn with yew and myrtles, and feast with their children, drink their wine, and crowned with their wreaths, and hymn the gods, I guess, praise the gods. They will enjoy having sex with one another. but they will produce no more children than their resources allow, lest they fall into poverty or war.
Right. Well, so two things. So that's exactly the point that I was talking about, because it's right after that Socrates says, okay, so this is our complete society, right? And Adimantus is like, are you sure? And then Socrates is saying, yeah, this is the complete city, and this is essentially, what you just outlined is the inventory of activities which they're going to do, which thankfully Socrates points out the fact that they're going to have sex with one another, which why you have to be specific about who they're having sex with is
what he's trying to get at is essentially these are the simple pleasures.
Sure, no, I know.
Simple pleasures.
He's built the simple rudimentary society at this point.
But then Glaucon is not happy. Glaucon says,
right. Glaucon chimes in, right?
He says, it seems you make your people feast without any relishes. Socrates says, yeah, true enough. I was forgetting that they will also have some relishes. Salt, of course. He had missed salt prior to this. He says salt and olives and cheese. They will boil roots and vegetables the way they boil them in the country. We will give them some desserts too. So he says desserts will be figs, chickpeas, and beans, and which they will roast myrtles and acorns before fire and drink in moderation. And so they will live in peace and good health, it seems. And when they die at a ripe old age, they will pass on a similar sort of life to their children.
And then Glaucon says something very, he catalyzes this.
Yes.
So he says something very telling.
The reason why we are laughing is because who lives like this, man? If we look at our lives right now, it is not like this at all. Because this is what Glaucon says, right?
Right. Glaucon's about to say why we don't live like this, right?
If you are founding a city of pigs, Socrates, isn't that just what you would provide to fatten them? He's saying that the life that you described just now is suitable for animals. And he uses pigs. Pigs is basically in their mind like not a noble animal.
Well, not noble, but also a very indolent,
right?
And not a very. It's not an animal that's perceived to have a very satisfactory or rich life. So that's what. And so richness, and I'm using the double entendre here: rich in terms of variety, but rich in terms of wealth and luxury. That's precisely what Glaucon is getting at. He's like, what about real society? Because what's happened here is that Socrates has built this very nice, humble, simple society. And what Glaucon is pointing out is like, yeah, but that's how pigs live. We don't live like that. We have all these luxuries. We have all these fine things that we want in life.
He says, and he doesn't say that we have. He says we should have.
Well, he said that the people will want that.
People will want that.
Right. And he's right. And so then Socrates says, so there it is. So now we have to make a distinction between, he uses the word, in this translation, the healthy city,
right,
and the feverish city. And we live in the feverish city. We live in the city that actually puts a high priority on these completely unnecessary luxury items that we essentially have decided add the variety and richness to our life that we feel like we need on day-to-day activity.
Right.
So then Socrates here now says, well, there's this whole other layer that you have to add for that.
Correct, because these are the words. Glaucon says, because Socrates says, so you didn't like my city? What would you have me do, Glaucon? Glaucon says, just what is conventional. Just do what's conventional. If they should recline, they should recline on proper couches. They should dine at tables, have relishes and desserts that people have nowadays. So then Socrates says, so it is not just merely the origins of a city that we are considering, but it seems those of a city that is luxurious too.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do that, that's exactly what you said. Now we have to add layers upon layers, because it's not enough now just to have the farmer and the clothes guy, the guy who builds the houses, the retailer. Even the retailer was fine. He was okay with the retailer. There was still justice in that system. But now you got to add all of these people, because now these guys are reclining on couches and dining these fine dining meals. Well, what I have to say, though, is something to keep in mind, and you can read about who all needs to be added to the city, because I think we're coming to a punch here. But is this the life that Socrates described, the simple life, was in fact the life of a lot of people living around that time in the city-states of Athens. But this book was written for the elite. If you were just a peasant, a farmer who tilled the land or build houses or sewed clothes, you weren't reading books with Plato.
No, I mean, you didn't have to go that far north from Athens to literally travel back in time and find Paleolithic type lifestyles back then.
Even not
Because
even
Athens
paleo.
was
Right.
Athens was well above
Sure.
the surrounding region in terms of what the level of complexity that society had reached.
But that is one. But even within Athens, of the city-state of Athens, how many people actually had the time or even the wherewithal to actually read a book? This book is written for the sons of noblemen, people who are going to be politicians down the line. So the simple life that Socrates was describing, I believe, was the life that he saw around them. The peasants of the time lived that life. And the rich people of the time lived the luxurious life. The luxurious life of lying on couches and dining and eating relishes and desserts and fattening themselves up was the luxurious life. He's going to describe other people now, the other characters that need to come to kind of make this life luxurious. So do you want to talk about that paragraph? That is 373b, about all the other people now that we require.
Well, yeah, but before I go there, but I do want to make a statement. So so what's happened though, there's an inflection. So what started off was that you had a group of people with an interconnected web of accountability based on needs. And now you have one that's based on wants.
That's exactly right.
Or needs and wants.
Man, that's beautiful.
That's what happps.
Because you can have some needs. So hold on. You can have all your needs met. You can have some wants, and you can still have a just society. But once your wants surpass your needs, you're not thinking about your needs anymore. Your needs are met. But you're a nobleman. Your needs are met. You're reclining on couches. You don't have to work. Don't have to do anything. It's all about the wants. You're right. That's when injustice can creep in. So
right, and so Socrates points out to Glaucon, well, if that's what you want, we have to enlarge our city again. And he uses this very sort of cryptic and phrase that's just sort of oozing with Socratic irony. He says, well, the healthy one is no longer adequate.
The healthy city is no longer adequate.
So he's not using the word healthy to describe what he's about to. And he says, on the contrary, now we must increase it in size and population and fill it with a multitude of things that go beyond what is necessary for a city. Hunters, for example, and all those imitators. Many of the latter work with shapes and colors, many with music, poets and their assistants, rhapsodies, actors, choral dancers, theatrical producers, and they will have to be craftsmen for multifarious devices, including, among other things, those needed for the adornment of women. In particular, then, we will need more servants, don't you think, such as tutors, wet nurses, nannies, beauticians, barbers, and relish cooks, and meat cooks too. Moreover, we will also need people to farm pigs. That animal did not exist in our earlier city since there was no need for it, but we will need it in this one. And we'll also need large numbers of other meat-producing animals, won't we? If someone is going to eat them. So again, that harkens back to this sort of paleo thing. You don't need pigs in a paleo or even a simple agrarian society. You just go out and hunt for it, right? The meat is earned. Here, the meat is bought, and that makes all the difference. And so Glaucon says, yeah, that's right. These are all the things that we need to do. But I think he's making that point because he says to Socrates explicitly, he says, be conventional. Like,
be conventional.
What is the natural arc of a societal development? When it is this, it's toward this complexity based on an interconnected network of wants and the luxuries and the people who provide those things.
Right. But see, that is Glaucon's ignorance. Because Socrates looks at the simple life that he sees around him. That is the life that we should be leading. And Glaucon sees, because he's a son of a nobleman, sees this life. He says, what are you talking about? Nobody lives like that. That's the life of a pig. This is how life should be. We should all be reclining on couches and eating desserts. And so he said, okay, so for that then, you're right. So, so then who are now these people in society? Actors. People who produce craftsmen of multifarious devices, not the people who make those tools that we need to till the soil and to build our houses. We're talking about
iPhones,
man. Perfect. and so suddenly, if you look at our life around us right now, right, who's telling their son or their daughter that you should grow up to be a farmer? Because that's what we need. We need people to be farmers and basic craftsmen. No, everybody's working for Apple. Or, wants to be Ben Affleck, whatever, but to just get your actor there. I don't know why Ben Affleck hit my mind. But my point is that Actors influence our kids. Actors influence you and me. These are the people on TV. These are people on social media. Now it's even worse. It's Instagram, whatever. What do they call the people who influence? Social media influencers, right? What is a social media influencer, man? It is worse than a retailer. Like a retailer at least gets two needs together. A social media influencer is what? Like how much luxury do we have to build to have someone like that not only exist, but to thrive?
Yeah, I don't know that I'd use the word worse, but it's even more emergent. Like it's an even more it's the most superficial layer in this ever.
It's a degradation.
It's this growing snowball of again this interconnected wants. That's
what I'm saying. That's making it more unhealthy, right? It's worse in a way.
Right.
There's a degradation of the society if you have social media personalities. And then he says, okay, so now you want to eat meat, huh? All right, so now you'll need to have factory farms. And that's what you see around us. People are eating 3 meals, and all 3 meals, including their snack, is a meat.
Right. Well, I mean, so the best line of the whole this book, by the way, follows right after that.
Right after that, which I know I don't want to say it. I want you to say it because this is your line, my friend.
Well, so after the comment about the pigs, Glaucon says, well, "Yeah, we certainly will, Socrates." And Socrates says, "Well, if we're going to live like that, won't we have a far greater need for doctors than we did before?"
Ding, 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 ding. Jackpot.
So Socrates is already he's wise to the idea of the illnesses of abundances. You know, right?
Dude, 2,500 years ago,
right?
They could tell you that if you live a life of excess, you are going to fall sick.
The illness of affluence.
Just imagine that statement, man. You know, right now it's a badge of honor. You're considered to be an intellectual elite if you talk on social media about the simple life. Exercise, eat simple organic food, right? Eat mostly plants, and not too much meat, and not that much food. Participate in simple exercises. Avoid luxuries, and you would live longer and be healthier. So what happens in that situation is that if you have to create a study. People say, oh, what's the data to support this simple life? As opposed to the life that we're leading currently. Why is the life that we're leading currently not, doesn't sustain us, and how come we're not living longer? You'll come with data. Man, like that conversation is inane. If 2,500 years ago, they had evidence just around them. This is what happens if you live a life of luxury. Now, people would argue that, man, what are you talking about? I'm not a son of a nobleman. I don't live a life of luxury. The simple fact is that the life of a nobleman back in the day, the life of a monarch back in the day, is the life of a common wage earner today. If you look at the comforts you have around you, this wasn't available to the richest of the rich 200, 300 years ago. This kind of opulence, this kind of safety, this kind of comfort, the kind of food, this kind of security, monarchs had it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And the common man didn't need doctors. The common man lived a simple life of hardship, simple living, without luxuries, and did all the things that Socrates talked about in that simple society. You know who required doctors to be constantly running around them? The noblemen.
Right. They had their own like personal physicians and things like that. And I think the other thing, to put it into historical context, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but they had just, this is occurring to me as I say this, they had just come out of the other side of the Peloponnesian Wars.
That's correct.
Here.
Mm-hmm.
And this lifestyle of simplicity very much echoes Spartan society.
That's true.
Yeah.
That is true.
And so there's this kind of there's an invoking of this Spartan ethos in some of this.
The only thing is the next point that comes up now is was absent in the society, the simple society that
right.
Socrates came up with. Because in that society, because it's a just society, it does not need to worry about injustice either onto itself or onto someone else, right? Because the ultimate expression of injustice is war.
Right. And so, and that leads us, so it's telling that we're going to end here talking about the relevance of Sparta, which its shadow looms over this discussion. And then this next step in the dialogue, which is they start talking about, well, if we're going to have a society like this, we will actually have to make arrangements for how we will make and execute war.
Right.
And so we'll get into that in the next section.
Yep.
All right.